I don't know if there's a polite way to talk about family when you've always felt like you weren't the main character in your own home. My name is Mark, I'm 35. I have a younger brother, Luke. He's 31. He has severe cerebral palsy. He doesn't speak, doesn't walk, can barely move. When he was born, I was 4. And from that point on, for as long as I can remember, everything in our house revolved around him. My mom quit her job a week after his diagnosis. My dad worked 2 jobs. Everything was organized around care, schedules, feeding, therapy, endless doctors. I grew up in the background of it all. Mornings were quiet because Luke is sleeping. Evenings, we had to stay silent because Luke's exhausted. Weekends meant physical therapy. And I existed, but as a side note. I behaved well because I couldn't afford to cause trouble. I taught myself how to do homework because mom didn't have time. I didn't get angry, because anger felt shameful. I don't blame them, honestly. They did what they could. At one point, I even admired them. My dad was quiet, tired, always backing mom. She was like a one-woman army, strict, focused, efficient. I learned how to be an adult way too early. At 9, I made my own dinner. At 10, I did the grocery runs. By 11, I knew how to give an injection. No one forced me. That was just how it had to be. I remember one particular day. I must have been around 12. I came home with an A on a huge math test. At our school, it was a big deal. Most kids failed. I showed the test to my mom. She looked, nodded, and said, "Good job. Can you put a warm compress on Luke's legs?" I went to the kitchen. It didn't even feel unfair. It just felt normal. When I turned 16, I realized I didn't want to live like this. I didn't want my life to orbit someone else's needs. Even if that someone was my brother. I moved away to study law. Rented a small room, worked part-time. At first, my mom called every day, asking for advice, venting. Then less. Then hardly at all. I didn't abandon them. I visited. I fixed their laptop, paid for prescriptions, sent money. Once I covered a stay at a rehab center when they couldn't. I wasn't physically there, but I did my part. I got married. We had a son. My parents came to the wedding, but they seemed older, quieter. My dad said, "Proud of you for staying connected." And I remember thinking, what would you call it if I hadn't? Last fall, my mom died. A heart attack. Sudden, fast. My dad followed 3 months later. Stroke. They both left, almost together. I attended both funerals. Took care of everything. Arranged it just the way they would have wanted. Simple ceremonies. Cremation. Urns buried side by side. I cried. Not sure why. Shock? Guilt? Loneliness? Luke was left alone. He was temporarily moved to a state-run care center. I thought I had time to figure things out. Make a plan. But a week later, I got a call from social services. A woman's voice, calm and procedural, told me I'd been appointed Luke's legal guardian. "It's automatic," she said. As next of kin, like it was paperwork, not a person. I was sitting in my car, listening to that voicemail, and I felt panic rising in my chest. I wasn't ready, not mentally, not logistically. We live in a 2-bedroom apartment. My wife works remotely. Our son is 6. We don't have the space, the resources, the strength. I wasn't his parent, I never had been. I drove to the center. Luke was in a chair by the window. His hair was freshly washed. A fleece blanket over his knees. He looked at me, and suddenly I saw our dad in his face. The same curve in the mouth. The same crease on his forehead. I sat beside him. He didn't speak, didn't react, just looked at me. I didn't know what to say. I put my hand on his shoulder and said, "I don't know how this will go, man. But I'm here." I left feeling wrecked, shaking. I drove home without the radio, just silence. My mind raced. What will my wife say? What about my job, our son? And more than anything, can I do this? I walked in the door. Our son was watching cartoons. My wife was in the kitchen making dinner. She turned, saw my face, and said quietly, "You found out, didn't you?" I nodded, then sat down, told her, they expect me to take him in. Officially. For good. She froze. Then asked gently, "And what are you feeling?" I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. I just felt like all the air had gone out of the room. My wife and I sat at the kitchen table for almost 2 hours. At first, in silence. Then in a quiet, strained conversation. She didn't yell, but every word she spoke carried fear. And I felt it too. If you take him in, we won't have our life anymore, she said, staring into a cup of cold tea. I didn't answer right away. I felt it too, even if I was afraid to say it out loud. I didn't want to go back to that kind of life, the one I had as a child. Calendars filled with medical appointments. Waking up not to your own child coughing, but your brother. Living every day with the weight of knowing that everything depends on your endurance. I had survived it once. I didn't want to survive it again. We tried to find alternatives. I started calling care centers, private facilities, in-home aid services. Some told me, we don't accept patients with that level of need. Others, minimum 1-year waitlist. One center said, if he doesn't have official incapacitation status, we can't admit him. I consulted a lawyer to understand the process. He listened, then said gently, it'll take time. And there's no guarantee. Without his consent, it's complicated. But there was no consent. Because Luke couldn't speak, couldn't sign a document, couldn't express what he wanted. He sat in his chair, looked out the window or at the wall. Sometimes he smiled, at nothing I could see. Sometimes he sighed. His world was locked away, and I didn't have a key to it. I tried talking to him. Told him how we were doing, how my son was growing, how our cat had gone nuts when we brought home a Christmas tree. He didn't react, just watched, eyes tracking the light, maybe. Then the relatives started calling. My Aunt Linda, Mom's sister, called first. Mark, how could you even think of not taking him? He's your brother. You're all he has now. Then my uncle on Dad's side. You're not thinking of putting him in a home, are you? The conversations weren't aggressive, but they were heavier than direct accusations. There was disappointment in their voices. Like I wasn't just betraying Luke, but the idea of family itself. My wife and I tried to explain. We don't have the space. We live in a small 2-bedroom. Our kids' room doubles as a home office. We can't afford full-time care. We don't have a lift van, a special bathtub, any training. But the more we explained, the more it sounded like excuses. Like we were looking for a way out, not a way through. I felt cornered. At work, people noticed I was off. One colleague asked, "You okay? You've been kind of checked out." I lied, said I was just tired. But really, my mind was consumed by one thought. I was back in the cycle I thought I'd escaped. Except this time, it wasn't childhood. It was adult, legally binding, morally inescapable. Every few days, I visited Luke. Brought him yogurt, socks, fresh towels. He never asked for anything. Just sat. One nurse once said, "He sleeps better after your visits." I nodded but didn't know what to say. I wasn't sure if that made me feel better, or worse. My wife grew quieter. We barely talked about Luke anymore. Only logistics. As if he was a problem to solve, not a person. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at me, tired, guarded. She didn't say it, but I knew what she was thinking. You chose this. So deal with it. I started to feel the weight of everyone's gaze. Neighbors, coworkers, even old friends. One asked me outright, "So, are you taking him in?" I mean, it's family, right? I just shrugged. I didn't want to defend myself. I didn't want to argue. But inside, I was screaming. What if I don't want to? What if I simply can't? I'm not a hero. I'm just a person, with limits. But no one wants to hear that. Not the state. Not relatives. Not society. You're expected to step up. End of story. Sometimes I'd wake up at night, heart pounding. I could almost hear my mother's voice. "You're the older one. You have to." It echoed like it had when I was a kid. Back then, it sounded like a rule. Now, like a sentence. And I started to wonder, had anyone ever asked Luke what he wanted? What if he could talk? Would he say he didn't want to be a burden to me? Or would he beg me to stay, to not leave him behind? But I didn't know. None of us did. And so I remained stuck in limbo. Between duty and freedom. Between what's right and what I can handle. And more, I realized, I don't want to live that life again. Even if that makes me a monster. At first, I really thought I could handle it. That if I approached this like a difficult, but solvable issue, I'd find a way through. I visited care centers, met with lawyers, read everything I could about support programs. I tried to think of Luke not as my brother, but as a case. It was the only way I could stay sane. But it stopped being logistical pretty fast. It became moral, and the more I tried to handle it bureaucratically, the more I looked, to others, like someone cold, selfish, abandoning. Aunt Linda called almost every day. Same question, just phrased differently each time. Did you bring him home yet? When I told her, again, that we were still working on the paperwork, she snapped. Have you looked in the mirror lately, Mark? Aren't you ashamed of yourself? He's your brother. You're all he has left. I put her number on silent after that. Then my uncle showed up uninvited. Sat at the kitchen table, folded his hands like we were at a funeral, and said, "You know what your dad would have done." He wouldn't have hesitated. I stared out the window to avoid eye contact. He spoke for 15 minutes, then stood, patted my shoulder, and left. Never came back. My cousins didn't say anything directly. But suddenly there were posts online. Things like, "It's hard to stay strong when your own blood turns away." I didn't respond. I deleted the app. Meanwhile, my job started falling apart. I was constantly late, missed meetings. One major client dropped us after I blew a deadline on their case. Management called me in. My supervisor said, "We get that you're going through something, but the team can't keep covering for you." I nodded, apologized, promised to do better, but nothing changed. My brain had no space left for tasks or decisions. Things were worse at home. My wife barely spoke. We ate in silence, went to bed without touching. I saw her crying in the bathroom once. She told me, "This isn't what I signed up for. When we got married, you said your family was us now. And now you're tearing it all apart." I tried to explain that I hadn't chosen this, that I was drowning too. She turned away. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," she said. Even our son noticed. He asked, "Why doesn't Uncle Luke live with us? Is he bad?" I didn't know how to answer. I said something about special doctors and needing extra care. He listened seriously. Then he said, "I wouldn't want you to send me away if I got sick." I stood up and walked out to the balcony because I couldn't stop the tears. Luke was still at the hospice. I visited every other day. Brought clean clothes, books he couldn't read, photos, of him, of me, of our parents. He stared at them for a long time. Sometimes smiled. One time, I saw a tear run down his cheek. I didn't know what it meant. I just held his hand and sat with him for 20 minutes. Silent. The staff were polite but tense. One of the nurses said, "He'd be better off at home. Here, he's fading." And I realized they judged me too. Quietly, with their eyes. Like a wall of expectation and unspoken disappointment. I started questioning everything. Myself, my choices, whether I had the right to want a normal life. I could feel myself becoming the person I'd always feared, the one who walked away. I remembered back in school, how kids would say, "Oh, that's Mark, the one with the vegetable brother." I used to fight them. I'd get furious. I'd defend Luke. And now I was that person. I started waking up with panic. My heart thumped too loud. My hands shook. I lost weight. I couldn't eat. I'd forget simple things. One day, my wife slipped a note into my bag. It said, "You're disappearing. I'm losing you." I kept it in my pocket for 3 days. Then I threw it out. Because I didn't know what else to do with it. I knew I had to make a decision. I couldn't keep living in limbo. But every option felt wrong. If I took Luke home, I might destroy my marriage. If I left him, I might destroy myself. So I stayed in the in-between, living in the shadow of something I couldn't name. Waiting for something, anything. The family meeting was held at Aunt Linda's house. Just like old times, the gold-rimmed plates, embroidered napkins, the cherry pie I used to sneak extra slices of when I was a kid. But the atmosphere was nothing like before. It was heavy, sharp. Everyone spoke in low tones, like we were preparing for a verdict, not a meal. They sat me in the middle of the living room. Linda across from me, her children on either side, my uncle and a few cousins spread around. No one smiled. No one asked how work was, or how my son was doing. Just heavy, expectant silence. I knew why I was there. But I'd hoped, foolishly, that it might go differently. "Mark," Linda began, "we know this is hard for you. It's hard for all of us. But you're the one left. You're the oldest now." I nodded, trying not to look at the picture of my parents on the wall. She continued, "We don't understand. Why isn't Luke with you? Why is he still in the system?" I tried to explain. I talked about the lack of space, the medical needs, how hard it had been to find solutions. My uncle cut in. "Those are just excuses. You don't want to deal with it. It's easier for you this way. You've got your own life, your own family. He doesn't fit in that picture anymore. My throat went dry. I wanted to say something measured, human, but nothing came. Linda's voice sharpened. Your mother would be rolling in her grave. She never would have done this. I looked down and said, she lived this life every day. She knew how hard it was. And she never asked me to come back. Silence. Then someone muttered, you've become one of those people who dump their relatives into care homes. The kind they show on TV. Another voice added, you're not poor. You've got a job, a wife, a kid. You just chose not to deal with it. I stood up. Thanks for the pie, I said. And left. I never went back. A week later, I filed the paperwork. Officially relinquished guardianship. It was excruciating. My hand trembled as I signed. But I knew, if I didn't do it now, I never would. That night, I sat on our balcony with a blanket, in silence. No music, no food, no drink, just stillness. My wife came out in the morning and sat beside me. Said nothing. We sat like that for 20 minutes. Then she got up and made breakfast. A month later, a letter arrived from the notary. My relatives had filed to have me removed from my parents' estate. The document read, in light of the voluntary refusal to fulfill moral and familial obligations. The house, the cabin, the remaining savings, all reassigned. I wasn't mentioned. I was legally erased. I held the paper for a moment, then folded it and tucked it into a drawer. Not out of anger, just to keep it out of sight. My wife asked, are you sure? I said yes. She nodded, squeezed my hand, but I saw fear in her eyes. Something between us had shifted. Not broken, but cracked. Like she was now seeing not just a husband, but a man who could walk away. Even for self-preservation. That thought gnawed at me. Work got better. I was on time again, delivering results. Colleagues joked, invited me to lunch. One said, good to have you back. I smiled, didn't say anything. I still visited Luke, brought headphones, picture books, chocolate. He never asked for anything. Never looked at me with anger. But the nurse once said, it's unusual that you still come. Most people disappear after they give up custody. I didn't reply, just smiled and left. Sometimes, I felt like I could finally breathe again. Like a weight had been lifted from my chest. I'd walk outside and notice the sky, not just the ground. But in those same moments, shame crept in. I had chosen freedom over blood. I was no longer carrying someone else's life. And that made me feel exposed. One night, my son asked, Dad, are you a good person? I said, I try to be. He thought for a moment, then said, sometimes you seem sad. And then I'm not sure. I didn't explain. I just hugged him. At Christmas, a card came in the mail. Linda's handwriting. Inside. You did what you thought was right. We didn't. No name. No signature. Just a cold period at the end. I held that card for a long time. Then put it in the drawer. Not because it hurt, but because I didn't know what else to do with it. Sometimes I wonder what Dad would have said if he were here. Maybe he would have shaken my hand. Maybe he would have punched me. I'll never know. But I know this. I'm different now. Free, but hollow. Someone who chose breath, at the cost of who he used to be. Several months had passed. Spring came early this year, as if winter had surrendered without a fight. The snow melted quickly, the trees budded almost overnight, and our son was back riding his bike around the courtyard like nothing in the world had ever changed. My wife and I sometimes joined him outside, quiet, each with a travel mug of coffee. We rarely talked about the past. But our silence wasn't hostile anymore. It felt careful, like we were both afraid of disturbing something fragile. Life slowly settled into a new rhythm. Work pulled me back in. I picked up cases I'd been avoiding, started leading internal trainings, participated in planning meetings again. Colleagues treated me like I was returning to life. I smiled, nodded, made jokes. Sometimes I even believed myself. Things at home softened too. My wife no longer tensed when I came home late. I started doing more. Cooking breakfast on weekends, cleaning the kitchen without being asked. Small things. But those small things became bricks we used to rebuild something that resembled peace. One evening we rewatched an old sitcom together, and she laughed, really laughed. It was like light suddenly filling a room we had kept dark for too long. And yet, something in me remained missing. I started waking up before my alarm, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. Not out of stress, out of absence. I didn't regret my decision. but I felt its shape inside me, like an outline of something amputated. The pain had faded, the memory hadn't. One morning, a letter arrived. Plain gray envelope. I opened it in the kitchen while my wife and son were still asleep. A standard report from Luke's care facility. Treatment notes, schedules, doctor signatures. At the end, a photo. Luke, sitting by a window, a book on his lap. He was smiling, or maybe it was just the lighting. I couldn't tell. I stared at the photo for a long time. Then ran my finger along the edge and slipped it into the drawer. Not because I didn't want to see it, but because I didn't know what else to do with it. Later, I wrote them back, thanked them, asked for a list of supplies he needed. Added a note that I'd cover any extras. A massage therapist, a better wheelchair, anything. A few days later, a nurse called. Her voice was warm but tired. Thank you. Luke sleeps more peacefully now. He looks out the window every day, at the same time. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. Let me know if he ever needs anything, I said. Sometimes, I stopped by the small church near my office. Not to pray, just to sit. It always smelled like wax, and the stained glass cast soft colors on the floor. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't know who would give it. I just sat, wondering if punishment still exists when no one condemns you but yourself. We never visited the cemetery. There wasn't a reason, or maybe there were too many. My parents' urns stayed with us, tucked into a niche I had built into the living room wall. I would stop there now and then, tell them about my son, about the weather, about Luke. I didn't expect answers, but I liked to believe they listened. One day, our son brought home a drawing from preschool. It showed our family, him, his mom, me, and an empty space beside us. I asked, "Who's this for?" He said, "I was going to draw Uncle Luke, but I didn't know how." I told him, "You did everything right." Later, I looked at that drawing for a long time, like a mirror. One where someone was clearly missing, and that somehow made it feel more honest. For my birthday, my wife gave me a large mirror framed in aged wood. "You always said you wanted something nice by the front door," she said. We hung it in the hallway. It reflected the whole room, the three of us. Me, her, our son. And a sliver of space beside us, where someone might have stood. It wasn't obvious, but it was there. Like a quiet absence that didn't need naming. I often found myself standing in front of that mirror. Not looking at my own reflection, but at that sliver. As if expecting it to fill. As if one day, it might. But I never turned around. Never stepped back. Never called out, "I'm living, working, loving, providing, doing all the things a man is supposed to do." But a part of me stayed behind, in a time that no longer exists. In a version of my life that still holds a place for someone who's no longer in it. And that silence, it isn't loud. It isn't cruel. It's like wind between two buildings, invisible, but always there. I've become a man who carries it, who walks with it, who breathes through it. I don't know if I made the right decision,